There was a forbidden heat in the air, a silence that wasn't the absence of sound, but rather the contained anticipation of something about to shatter, like a thin veil holding a secret that shouldn't be revealed. The polished corridors of Potiphar's house gleamed under the golden light of Egypt, a place where every stone seemed to hold silent confessions, and every shadow stretched like a mute witness to desires that could not be named. There, amid imported tapestries and expensive perfumes, a young Hebrew walked, unaware that he would become the center of a storm of passion and lies, an echo that would span millennia, reaching us with the same taste of danger. Potiphar's wife, a woman shaped by power and loneliness, looked at Joseph not as one might look at a servant, but as one might see a body that could set destiny ablaze. There was no pity in that look, only a silent invitation, a sweet poison that slowly seeped out, a plot that would transform a luxurious home into an invisible courtroom, where desire would be both weapon and sentence. At the end of this video, a sacred and hidden detail will be revealed, the existence of an ancient record, lost for centuries, which suggests that Potiphar's wife was not just an impulsive woman, but part of a silent network of female power that crossed political and religious boundaries, using seduction not as weakness, but as a form of spiritual espionage capable of toppling empires. A secret hidden in the archives of a sect that met in the shadows of Egypt's temples, with forbidden rituals that connected bodies and gods. This revelation, if true, changes not only the way we understand Joseph, but also the invisible power of the women who silently shaped sacred history. If this whisper of desire and conspiracy has already made your skin crawl, turn that feeling into action now. Tap the subscribe button like someone holding an ancient key and leave your like as someone who marks a secret before it slips away forever. Don't let this story return to the silence of the shadows without you being part of the one who revealed it to the world. Egypt in Potiphar's time was not just a territory ruled by men with heavy crowns and eyes turned to the heavens for the gods' approval. It was a living organism, pulsing in every dusty street, in every boat gliding along the Nile, in every market filled with spices that exuded the sweet scent of cinnamon mixed with the bitter resin of incense. The homes of the nobles were fortresses of silence, where power was revealed in the details. Walls engraved with hieroglyphics telling the story of conquests, guardian statues that seemed to breathe in the darkness, and corridors so long that the very notion of intimacy disappeared under the weight of opulence. Potiphar was a high-ranking official, someone whose gaze could decide a man's life with a single gesture. His residence, reflecting his position, stood as a monument to discipline and control. But within those walls, the official silence hid deeper noises, the squeak of hurried sandals, the whisper of servants tending to his wife's hair, and the constant presence of a young Hebrew who did not belong to that world, but who carried within him something unsettling, something the house itself seemed to sense. Joseph, sold into slavery, had found a new life there, far from the dust of caravans and the memories of a shattered home. His eyes saw every detail, and his simple gestures carried the purity of someone who still believes in the value of work and integrity. But in that same space, Potiphar's wife moved like a shadow charged with intentions, a woman wrapped in translucent silk and delicate gold, whose beauty was both celebrated and feared. Her body, molded by rare oils and imported perfumes, was not merely adornment. It was a weapon of silent power, polished with the same dedication as a war blade. The tension wasn't born from a single glance, but from the sum of prolonged silences, from exchanged footsteps in the hallway, from accidental encounters that were never completely innocent. Egypt knew how to transform any gesture into a symbol, and in that house, symbols were alive. A fruit fallen to the floor, one hand touching another while handing a jug of water. A glance that lingered a second too long. Everything was a slow, invisible dance, ready to explode. And when the sun burned the inner courtyards, painting the stones with fiery hues, that house seemed like a private altar, where the gods watched the story of two destinies that should never have crossed, but they did. And the story to this day still carries the weight of every second of that forbidden encounter. Who, observing this ancient tension between desire and purity, doesn't feel the strange familiarity of something that also lives in our time, hidden beneath our own silent walls? What is more dangerous, desire itself or the silence that fuels it? What if the fate of empires were determined not by battles but by whispers and forbidden glances? Comment below. What hidden power do you believe shaped this story the most? Potiphar's house was not just a residence. It was a physical statement of power and authority. Every erected pillar, every carved stone carried a silent message. Here dwells one whose will surpasses that of other men. The complex stretched like a calculated maze, designed to disorient any visitor who dared enter without invitation. The high outer walls, clad in polished limestone, reflected the sunlight in such a way as to blind anyone who approached, as if the architecture itself had been designed to intimidate. At the center, the private quarters were the heart of this domestic empire. Here, the corridors were wide enough for the silent processions of servants and messengers, yet narrow enough to convey the feeling that every movement was being watched. The narrow windows allowed the Nile breeze to touch the interior walls, but were too high to permit a glimpse outside. Everything there served as a reminder that, even within wealth, freedom came at a price, and that all eyes ultimately belonged to Potiphar. And amidst this stark setting, Potiphar's wife shone like a living artifact. The cold architecture of the house contrasted with the softness of her movements and the deliberate delicacy of her gestures. Where Potiphar represented institutional strength, she represented the subtlety of influence. Her quarters were different from the rest, a space where luxury was more intimate, with fabrics hanging from the ceiling like ethereal veils, alabaster jars filled with rare ointments and perfumes, and mosaics on the floor depicting not only aesthetic but also spiritual symbols, as if it were a private sanctuary built to manipulate emotions. It was in this contrast, the masculine hardness of the structure and the feminine fluidity of its interiors, that the true tension of the house emerged. For Potiphar's power was evident, solid, military, while hers was invisible, silent, interwoven between glances and smiles, between gestures of apparent fragility and a firmness disguised beneath the linen cloths. Jose walked through those corridors like a discordant note in a perfectly rehearsed piece of music. His presence disrupted the usual rhythm. He was a foreigner, young, and possessed a rare beauty that didn't belong in that hierarchical setting. And for a woman living in an environment designed to control every aspect of her life, encountering something or someone untamed by that architecture was more than a breath of fresh air. It was a provocation, a silent threat to the established order. And perhaps this is what bothers us most, realizing that no matter how much we build high walls and perfect corridors, real power is not always where it seems to be. What if the true strength of a house lay not in its walls or guards, but in the whispers that echo behind closed doors? Who do you think really held the power? In Potiphar's house, in the heart of Egypt, far beyond the stone corridors and military symbols, there existed a silent politics that appeared neither in official records nor in war assemblies, the game of female alliances. The wives of powerful men were not merely social adornments or status symbols. They were strategic threads in an invisible network connecting families, cities, and entire kingdoms through desire, beauty, and carefully planned intimacy. Potiphar's wife was no exception. Their marriage was not born of spontaneous love, but of a combination of convenience and power. Potiphar, a man accustomed to dealing with military codes and direct orders, saw in his wife a perfect tool to solidify his position at court, and perhaps access the more subtle spheres of the royal palace. But for her, the union meant more than comfort. It was a way to access the epicenter of information and influence. Women like her learned early on that bodies could become bargaining chips, and that feminine subtlety could break down walls that not even the sharpest weapons could penetrate. Meetings between the wives and concubines of high-ranking officials were shrouded in layers of apparent politeness, gift exchanges, trivial comments about fabrics and perfumes, polite laughter during banquets. But behind every sustained glance and every seemingly accidental touch lay deep calculations. A well-placed word could change the perception of an entire family. A subtle suggestion could alter trade alliances, and a well-timed rumor could transform allies into deadly rivals. Potiphar's wife mastered this art. She knew when to smile, when to remain silent, and when to hint at a non-existent secret, only to watch anxiety spread like poison through the corridors of power. This talent wasn't learned in manuals or formal rituals. It was passed from woman to woman, from generation to generation, in nighttime conversations and whispered confidences as hands braided hair or adjusted gold, bracelets, and on this board Joseph was an unexpected piece, a young foreign servant with disconcerting integrity and a look that seemed unbending to the social game. He wasn't there for political alliances or female intrigues, but his presence destabilized everything, an object of desire but also a threat to the carefully maintained balance between the wife's silence and the husband's authority. Isn't it intriguing to think how often the greatest wars don't happen in open fields, but inside silent houses, fought not with swords but with looks and secrets? Before night fell over Egypt, and the silence of Potiphar's house became heavy as an unconfessed secret, there was a daily ritual that few eyes dared to witness. Potiphar's wife, like so many powerful women of her time, mastered the art of transforming her body into a spiritual and political instrument. It wasn't just vanity, it was strategy, a discipline learned early on, taught by older servants who had served other wives. Before her, women who carried in their gestures the silent wisdom of those who understand that seduction can move kingdoms more swiftly than entire armies. Purification began with water. Alabaster basins were filled with infusions of rare oils, myrrh, spikenard, cinnamon, and lotus petals that floated like signs of an almost divine femininity. The water was heated so it embraced the skin, dissolving not only the desert dust, but also the invisible tensions of the mind. With each immersion, the body became more than just a body. It was an altar under construction, prepared to receive a power that came not only from the flesh, but from the intention of the user. Next came the ointment, a thick mixture of oils and resins, applied by the hands of servants, chosen not only for their skill, but also for their absolute discretion. The movements were slow, almost liturgical, covering every curve of her body with a shimmering film that reflected the light of the bronze lamps. The perfume permeated the hallways, making its presence felt even before she entered any room. It wasn't a sweet, youthful fragrance, but a deep, almost hypnotic one, designed to linger in the memory of anyone who dared breathe too close. The fabrics completed the metamorphosis. Fine linen dyed with expensive pigments clung like a second body, revealing more than it covered, balancing suggestion and prohibition. Each fold was calculated to attract without seeming vulgar, each color chosen to elicit a specific, emotional effect: the white of apparent purity, the red of latent danger, the gold of implicit divinity. Finally came the finishing touches: kohl-lined eyes, giving them an almost feline appearance, lips touched with natural dyes that mimicked the flush of desire, and hair styled with almost mathematical precision, falling like a frame around a face trained to hide what she truly felt. The result was not just a woman ready to charm, she was a force ready to dominate. Jose, upon meeting her, after these rituals, saw not just a woman, but a presence deliberately constructed to disarm any defense. And yet, there was something in her that resisted, something that intrigue transformed into obsession. Because what is more disturbing to someone who masters the art of seduction than encountering someone who refuses to yield to enchantment? How many times throughout history have bodies been used as temples and weapons at the same time? And how many of these battles were won without a single drop of blood being shed? The room reserved for Potiphar's wife was not merely an intimate space, it was a sacred theater, meticulously designed to transform any encounter into an unforgettable sensory experience. The space spoke before any word was spoken, shaping the mind of whoever entered. The walls were covered with fabrics dyed purple and deep blue, colors reserved for those who carried power and mystery. The lighting came not from crude torches, but from low lamps that spread a soft, almost liquid light, wavering as if the air itself breathed desire. In the center, a wide bed made of imported wood rested on a slightly raised platform. Like an altar, Egyptian linen bedspreads, embroidered with gold thread, carried not only a luxurious touch, but also discreet symbols of fertility and power, sewn so that only the most discerning eye could decipher them. Beside them, alabaster jars exuded perfumes prepared with secret formulas, blends of resins and flowers that not only enchanted the sense of smell, but also provoked a feeling of mild vertigo, an invitation to forget external obligations. Selected musicians, often invisible behind curtains, played harps and flutes in minor keys, creating a hypnotic, almost ritualistic atmosphere. There the senses were captivated. vision dominated by golden light, touch provoked by soft linen, smell intoxicated by dense perfumes, and hearing enveloped in music that seemed to speak directly to the most primal part of the soul. It was in this space that Potiphar's wife awaited Joseph, not like a lady before her servant, but like a priestess before a chosen sacrifice. Her every movement, a slow touch on the edge of the bed, a gaze held for a second too long, a barely perceptible smile, was choreographed. Seduction wasn't impulse, it was method. There was no improvisation here. Everything was planned to destabilize, to create the feeling that refusing would almost be an affront to the universe she represented. Upon entering this space, Jose felt the invisible weight of the setting. It was impossible to ignore the explicit intention of every detail. The room was not neutral. It was a deliberate assault on reason, a temple designed to induce desire and blur the boundaries of morality. But Jose did not give in, and this resistance, so rare in that kind of environment, did not drive her away. On the contrary, it fueled something more dangerous: obsession, because those who dominate the senses of everyone around them are not accustomed to dealing with those who remain unshakable. And so, in that temple of seduction, something more dangerous than desire itself was born: the need for conquest at any cost. How many spaces throughout history were designed not only to inhabit bodies, but to shape desires? And do these temples of seduction still exist, hidden in modern forms, waiting to transform resistance into fascination? What's your opinion? Let me know. The luxury of Potiphar's house was not merely a display of power, but a silent battlefield where the weapons were not spears or swords, but calculated looks, restrained smiles, and words as sharp as hidden blades. Every woman who lived or circulated in that space, from servants to influential visitors, understood that the position of the chief wife was not guaranteed by the signing of a contract or the blessing of the gods, but by her ability to maintain absolute control in an environment saturated with subtle rivalries. Potiphar's wife was a master of an ancient art, war waged without the sound of metal. She could read every gesture, every nod of a concubine too young or a servant too beautiful to smile at the wrong man. Her allies were a few confidants, often temporary, women who served as her eyes and ears, spreading information and intercepting rumors. And there were rumors, there always were, about Joseph's foreign beauty, about his almost irritating discipline, about his refusal to bow to the veiled games of seduction that permeated that household. The rivalries weren't explicit, but they manifested themselves in almost imperceptible details. An ivory comb deliberately broken, a jewel that disappeared and reappeared in the wrong place, a word misinterpreted in front of the right people. It was a cold war where reputation was the first casualty and desire the weapon of choice. And at the center of it all, Potiphar's wife found herself facing an unprecedented situation. Her target wasn't another woman, but a man who not only didn't reciprocate her advances, but also threatened, albeit unintentionally, to expose the strategic vacuum of her control. This public, yet silent refusal exposed her to all. Every servant who witnessed her insistent gaze and Joseph's firm response became potentially a mouth ready to spread the rumor that could erode her power. It was a deeper blow than any female rival had been able to inflict, and thus, war ceased to be a matter of pride and became a matter of survival. Women in that environment understood a truth few cultures dare admit: when one dominates the game, there is no room for defeat. Victory was not just a matter of vanity, it was a matter of power, of status, of staying or being destroyed. And so, the desire that had been born of whim became an obsession that could only end with an accusation that would change destinies and echo through the centuries. How many of these invisible wars do you believe shaped not just homes and families, but the very history of entire kingdoms? And could it be that even today these silent battles still rage around us, hidden behind seemingly perfect smiles? In Egypt, succession was not just a matter of blood, but of carefully calculated power. Each child represented not only a genetic inheritance, but a political claim, a ticket to permanence in history or a definitive descent into oblivion. Potiphar's wife, still without publicly acknowledged children, bore the silent weight of this expectation, because in the world of the powerful, female fertility was not an intimate gift, but social currency, a proof of worth before other women, and a tool of influence over men who saw heirs as an extension of their own names. Having a son meant having an anchor in the future, a means of maintaining power even when her husband's hair began to grey or when new favorites threatened her position. Therefore, among the women in Potiphar's circle, the struggle for children was also a struggle for control. Whoever provided her husband with an heir became virtually untouchable, while those who remained childless had to devise other means of remaining indispensable. And often, these means involved dangerous games of seduction, internal alliances, and even spiritual manipulation. Potiphar's wife knew this scenario well. Her beauty and intelligence had earned her an enviable status, but the absence of a son left her vulnerable, exposed to the silent judgment of other wives and the attention of young concubines eager to take her place. Perhaps it was this symbolic void that made her obsession with Joseph all the more ardent. He wasn't just a body, he was a chance to prove to herself that she could achieve anything she desired, even that which was forbidden to her. The upbringing of a child in that society was not neutral. Mothers shaped the minds of future leaders, imprinting on them their own worldview, religious beliefs, and secret loyalties. A son represented a political extension of the mother herself, an instrument to influence decisions far beyond the marital bed. Therefore, female intrigues were not limited to personal rivalries. They were wars for control of the future. By resisting, Joseph was unaware that he was also breaking with this hidden system of power. He wasn't just a man saying no to a woman, he was a foreigner who, unwittingly, was opposing a structure of domination based on blood alliances and silent manipulation. His refusal resonated as an affront not only to Potiphar's wife, but to the entire logic of that world. Isn't it disturbing to realize how the fate of empires may have been determined not on battlefields or sacred temples, but in silent rooms and golden cradles? How many historic decisions were born from an invisible dispute over who controls the future through a child? Egypt was an empire that breathed spirituality in every standing stone and in every shadow cast by its obelisks. Its gods were many, their stories intertwined like rivers that cross in secret. But when foreign women entered their homes, they didn't just bring different accents or clothes of rare fabrics, they brought gods. Small idols hidden among jewels, amulets wrapped in linen cloths, symbols engraved on seemingly decorative pieces, all carrying memories of distant lands and beliefs that found no place on the pharaoh's official altars. Potiphar's wife, like so many other women connected to circles of power, maintained her own secret space of devotion. A small room, hidden behind heavy curtains, exuded a distinct scent, not just of Egyptian oils, but of imported herbs and resins. There, amidst scented wax candles and inscriptions in unknown languages, lay a dangerous syncretism, a mixture of invocations to foreign gods and local rituals, something official tradition would never permit. These parallel cults were forbidden not only because they questioned the supremacy of the Egyptian gods, but because they carried with them an implicit promise of personal power. Those who prostrated themselves before these altars sought something beyond social blessing. They sought mastery over destinies, the ability to alter invisible events. And, in the case of Potiphar's wife, these rituals included practices that combined seduction and spirituality. Specific ointments, incantations murmured before encounters, offerings with hidden intentions, all part of a secret feminine tradition inherited from women who understood that spirituality could be used as a silent weapon. Joseph, a man of singular and rigid faith, sensed something strange in that environment. It wasn't just the perfume that bothered him, but the sensation of being in a charged space where the atmosphere seemed heavier, almost electric. He knew the difference between the sacred and the profane, between pure devotion and worship, shaped by the desire for power. His refusal to surrender himself to Potiphar's wife was not only an act of moral integrity, but an instinctive reaction against something that seemed spiritually and morally corrupt. This clash of beliefs, Joseph's one god and the many gods intermingled in secret rituals, created an invisible tension, much deeper than a simple indecent proposal. It was a clash between two spiritual worlds, between a faith centered on righteousness and a private cult centered on control. How many times throughout history have religions and personal desires silently intermingled, creating secret cults that were never officially recorded, but that influenced entire destinies? Could it be that even today there are places where hidden altars silently shape the choices of those who seem to hold power? When desire knows no bounds, it becomes a destructive force, capable of slowly eroding even the most solid structures. In Potiphar's house, the balance built by years of discipline and apparent stability began to crumble from a single moment: the accusation. A gesture of rejection turned into a cry of humiliation, a refusal into planned revenge. Potiphar's wife, realizing her seduction would not be reciprocated, chose the most powerful weapon at her disposal: words. And words, when charged with pain and wounded pride, can bring down more than armies. Joseph, a man of integrity, suddenly became a villain. His faithfulness to his God, his unwavering character, and his refusal to indulge a forbidden desire were twisted into a venomous narrative, that of the foreign servant who dared to dishonor his master's house. There was no public trial, no room for defense. There was only the silent fury of Potiphar, a man torn between rage and shame, who chose the simplest path: arrest Joseph and end the matter before rumors could spread. But the fall wasn't his alone. Potiphar's own wife, though she officially maintained her position, lost something invisible and far more precious: her credibility among those who truly mattered. Servants whispered in the hallways, eyes averted as she passed. The power that once seemed absolute was now tainted by a story that, even without proof, bore the mark of a felt lie. Even if never stated aloud, Egypt also paid its price, because every act of injustice committed within the powerful houses fueled a silent current of moral decay. Potiphar's house became a symbol of an uncomfortable truth: where pleasure is used as a weapon, ruin is not a matter of if, but of when. And Joseph, even in prison, continued to carry with him the same integrity that had made him a target. Imprisoned, but not defeated, his story would still be intertwined with the fate of kings and empires, proving that not even the most elaborate lie can prevent the inevitable from unfolding. How many empires do you think began to fall, not because of declared wars or economic crises, but because of individual desires transformed into silent poison? And could it be that even today, the price of pleasure continues to be paid in silence by those who believe they can control all the consequences? What seemed like an isolated episode of forbidden desire and domestic revenge conceals a much deeper secret, preserved in rare papyrus fragments and apocryphal records kept by groups that survived the persecutions of time. These writings, dating back centuries, speak of a silent network of women connected to powerful circles who used seduction as a tool not only for pleasure, but also for spiritual and political espionage. Potiphar's wife would not have been an impulsive exception. She was part of a group that met secretly to share rituals, strategies, and even sensitive information gleaned from the most powerful men in Egypt. This female network, according to these records, had its own altars, hidden from the eyes of official religious authorities. Their meetings involved forbidden chants, special ointments prepared with ancient formulas, and oaths that united these women in a sisterhood where loyalty prevailed over any husband or nation. The attempt to seduce Joseph could have been more than a simple pursuit of pleasure. It could have been a test, a ritual of power, an attempt to recruit or subjugate a man whose spiritual integrity was known and feared. And herein lies the most intriguing consequence. If this network truly existed, it didn't disappear with the collapse of a house or the arrest of an innocent man. Records suggest that it spread silently, influencing decisions and shaping alliances far beyond the confines of that story. Hidden female power, often relegated to the shadows of the official narrative, may have played a crucial role in political changes never attributed to them. Joseph was released from prison years later, elevated to an unprecedented position of authority, but Potiphar's wife disappears from the biblical narrative without explanation. What happened to her? Was she punished, or did she continue her activities in the shadows, untouched, as part of a network that was never officially revealed? Perhaps the real mystery lies not in the desire or the lie that led Jose to prison, but in the invisible power of a parallel society that transformed intimacy into a weapon and spirituality into a battlefield. And here remains the question that echoes like an uneasy whisper. Do these invisible powers still walk alongside us, silently shaping history without our noticing? Or could it be that, like Joseph, there are still those who, by resisting, expose a game as old as humanity itself? If every detail of this story still vibrates in your mind, like an echo trapped between golden walls and whispering veils, let that feeling become a gesture now. Tap the like button as if sealing a secret in time, and subscribe so that no future whisper is lost. Because what's emerging on the screen right now isn't just another story, it's a portal to something even deeper, more hidden, and perhaps more dangerous than you imagine.